Welcome to KRA's The Hub, the official podcast of KRA Corporation. And now get ready to hear workforce topics and trends you need to know on the go.
Hello and welcome back to KRA's The Hub. This is Doug Foresta. Of course, Jonathan Overall is here. And joining us today, our special guest is Merry Campbell. She is the Chair of Employment and Labor at Shillman Rogers. She's also outside General Counsel to KRA. We're going to cover a whole bunch of interesting topics related to legal issues. Jonathan, always great to be with you. Merry, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You too, Doug, and thanks, Merry. And it's great to have a conversation with you today, Merry, in this forum, and looking forward to today's conversation, really providing some insight for our audience, those that work directly with employers and perhaps even employers as well that are in this space where this topic will definitely be relevant. So let's jump into our first question. With recent legislation around hiring transparency and equity on the horizon, really in several different states, how do you see the recruitment and hiring process evolving with that?
Yeah, so this is an exciting time. I think we are in sort of a new age of hiring and recruitment, especially with all the new technologies that are available to us. And then we're coupling that with some intersections of law. So a lot of states are requiring employers to be more transparent in their recruiting, looking at things like salary bands and things like that, but also being more transparent about their diversity and equity hiring. And all of these things, both the requirements imposed by the states, the goals of the various employers, and the reality of a sometimes challenging recruiting environment are all sort of intersecting to make this an exciting time for recruiters and employers.
Thank you so much. So you mentioned, you hinted at the piece about technology and evolution, and I think 2023 may very well be remembered as sort of the year of AI, and which of course is a wonderful tool, but also brings up all these other ethical and legal issues. Can you talk about some of the ethical implications of AI as algorithms become, more embedded in hiring decisions?
Right. You can't always trust the machines. So AI is actually impacting both the employee's application process and the employer or recruiter's review of those applications. So for example, I've talked to many of my clients about new approaches some candidates are applying to their application process. For example, we've seen applicants paste the entire job posting on their resume using white print so that it's invisible, but so that AI screening tools will pick it up so that all the appropriate keywords are picked up in the screening. AI is also impacting our employers' decision-making, right? We're screening out certain applicants without a human ever reviewing the application or the resume. Both of these are problematic, and it's just a true reminder that as much help and assistance the AI and technology might bring, you always need to have a human element in this process.
Well, thank you, Mary. Yeah, can you say a little bit more about sort of that ethical piece?
Sure. So, ethics is such a loaded word, but what I think what we're really looking at when we're applying technology to these decisions is that we want to look for efficiencies, and we want to look for ways to make all these systems run more smoothly so that we get the best applicants in front of the hiring managers. At the same time, garbage in, garbage out. So from an ethical perspective, how you set up the algorithm, how you manage the technological portion of the screening process, you might inadvertently be screening out either classes of people, categories of people. Here's where race discrimination or other forms of discrimination are coming into play, not necessarily intentionally. I think for the most part, everyone I'm talking to, these are what's called disparate impact, which is really just fancy lawyer for patterns, unintentional consequences of decisions made at the screening process that the results sort of accumulate over time in how the candidates are being processed. So it really comes back to how the AI is being set up, how it's being applied, and what human touches are continue to be involved in this process because, of course, if there's a flaw in your setup, there's going to be a flaw in your ultimate screening process.
So Mary, can you talk a little bit about demographic data, which today is more readily available across the candidate journey? How do employers safeguard against possible discrimination uses while tapping into the insights of that data of demographics?
Right, that's a real challenge because, of course, we have some competing goals. There are definitely employers out there that are looking to create a more diverse workforce because they see the value in bringing different perspectives and different experiences into that workforce. We also have some employers that potentially have some nefarious goals and are looking at some of this data for problematic reasons, maybe even not intentionally making those decisions, but there are some resulting patterns that we're seeing in the workforce. So depending on the size of the organization and state and federal law, you might be required to keep certain demographic information and share that information with various government agencies. You might be just tracking this information on a voluntary basis on your own so that you can look to ensure a more diverse workplace. But as with any other, information is powerful, but with great power comes great responsibility. And so with all of the data that you're collecting, you have an obligation to both, maintain confidentiality, but also apply that information in an appropriate way.
Let's talk a little bit about, you are the counsel, and let's talk a little bit more about the legal piece about, what are some pragmatic steps an organization can take to make sure that their hiring practices align, obviously, with emerging local and federal laws. And let's talk particularly about diversity disclosures and equity.
So the first place, whenever anyone asks me about pragmatic steps, the first place to remember is when you are treating your employees, your applicants, your customers, the people you interact with dignity and with respect, that's going to result in good outcomes. So it starts with making sure you're thinking about these processes, not just as like a technical bureaucratic approach, I'm going to apply an algorithm, but making sure you're treating everyone who you encounter with dignity and with respect. So if we start with that, if you want to be intentional about what you're trying to accomplish. So if what you are trying to accomplish is a more diverse workplace, that is appropriate, especially if you can justify it because of the additional contributions people from different perspectives and backgrounds are going to bring to your workplace. But you never want to make decisions, especially with the recent guidance from the Supreme Court and other federal decisions. You never want to make decisions specifically with quotas in mind or with a direct goal of hiring a particular category into a role. Instead, it's about hiring the right person who has the right skill set. And part of that analysis can be a consideration of different perspectives, different backgrounds.
So Mary, following up from that question, how does an employer balance the legal compliance with diversity, equity, and inclusion and their goals in recruiting and hiring at this time right now?
So legal compliance is never easy. And I would say right now it's even a little bit more challenging than what we've experienced in the past because we have some conflicting compliance obligations. So we have had and continue to have obligations not to discriminate against anyone on the basis of age, race, sex, any protected characteristic. And that those requirements have been in place for quite some time. They're on the federal level, they're on the state level. We're all familiar with those expectations, but we also are living at a time where we're getting guidance from the Supreme Court and some newer guidance suggesting that while we cannot discriminate on the basis of these protected characteristics, we also cannot, on the flip side, discriminate in favor of these protected characteristics. So a lot of organizations who have spent some time and energy on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts are running into some constraints, some concerns about perhaps falling a little bit too far on the side of the pendulum of applying criteria to the exclusion of certain classes, majority classes. So this is challenging. It's a little bit of a landmine, but I again come back to treat people with dignity and with respect, treat everybody, to the best of your ability with fairness. And that means hiring the right person for the right job, regardless of those protected characteristics, as opposed to, excluding people because of a protected characteristic. I recognize that is sometimes easier said than done, but if you're working with good counsel, there's a lot of policies, trainings, specific conversations with managers, and again, going back to your algorithms, if you're using AI, that will set you on the right path there.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about treat people with, dignity and respect. It's right. It's not just about the legal piece. That will help the legal part of it. It's treat people with dignity and respect.
It's funny that you frame it that way. And I run into this conversation all the time with clients because we're dealing with humans and humans make mistakes and they do dumb things. And we're never going to have a perfect work environment, both, when we're thinking about what happens on the job, but also in terms of the decisions that we're making. But if you start with the framework of people trying to make the right decisions and applying the right criteria, you will get a little bit of grace and you will get a little bit of forgiveness for when the mistakes happen. And hopefully what we're talking about is small mistakes and not major tragedies. But if you start with that premise, that sets us up for a better shot of being able to deal with the mistakes when they happen.
I want to circle back for a moment to AI. And, you're talking about people make mistakes, AI makes mistakes. It's not as perfect as we'd like. Nothing is as perfect as we'd like it to be. You talked a little bit about the ethical considerations, but what are some of the legal considerations, especially for companies that really rely heavily now on AI screening?
Well, I mean, if AI discriminates, nobody's suing the AI, they're suing the employer. So you're still responsible for all the employment decisions that the company's making. And that's not just the human decisions. That includes if, your technology screens out applicants. So as a result, your pool of candidates that by the time a human eventually gets involved, your pool of candidates is missing some crucial elements because the AI has screened them out. That is not the problem of technology. That is the problem of the humans who have set up the screen. And so that is going to continue to be, it's not a change in the law. It's the same law. It's just that the fact that there's no human involved will maybe blind us to some of these patterns that would have been a little bit more obvious in the past.
That's great. Now, Mary, could you talk to us about some of the upcoming legal and regulatory trends that recruiters and talent acquisition leaders should be paying attention to right now, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
Well, so that's an interesting question. And I think that trends, they are as much special to AI and technology as they are just to recruiting in general. So the workforce has shifted. So if what you're looking for are you're at least more open to remote applications, you might never see this applicant, may never see their face, right? So you're not getting some of the same information that you would get in a person-to-person, face-to-face application process. So in terms of trends, there's a great value and sort of a lot of opportunity in these broader recruiting, and that goes to some of those diversity goals that we've been talking about. If you're not looking at the same local pool of candidates, you might be able to create a more diverse workforce, both in terms of traits as well as experiences. But by the same token, the more remote, sometimes the more automated and less humanistic the decisions are. So you have to, as you're looking for trends in hiring, you have to keep in mind that all the legal framework that we've been dealing with for decades now under Title VII and the related legislation, those obligations remain in place, and we all have our goals in terms of creating the most efficient and effective workplace, and often that means diversity and inclusion as well. But when we're talking about inclusion, in terms of hiring trends, the more spread out, which might improve your diversity, the bigger the challenge it is in terms of inclusion. So this all takes work, effort, just like every other hiring decision and recruiting issue we're facing.
Yeah, one of the things I really hear you saying here, Mary, is that AI isn't going to absolve organizations of making decisions and check it, right? It's not going to do everything for us. And like you said, if a mistake is made, the AI isn't going to be the one in court getting sued either. So
well said. AI absolves us of nothing. Sometimes if something is a little too easy, that's the time to take a check and question whether we're getting all the information that we need.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mary, for today's conversation. You touched a lot of areas: technology, diversity, equity, inclusion, the recruitment process. And I think these are all very relevant and helpful insights that you provided to our audience today that can really provide insight on the day-to-day work that they do. And so appreciate the work that you do outside of this, working with us as an organization and bringing some of that perspective to those that listen to KRA's The Hub podcast.
Thank you for including me.
Thank you for listening to KRA's The Hub. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about KRA Corporation, visit www.kra.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back soon with a new episode.